Okay, guys, and as you see it here, it's on newsmaven.io, Indian Country website, and it says here, it says Rosa Parks rocked the civil rights world when she refused to give up her seat to a white male passenger on a segregated bus called the First Lady of Civil Rights by the U.S. Congress. Rosa Parks was also of Cherokee and Creek descent. And as you see, this picture is in the National Archives and Records Administration records of the U.S. Information Agency Record Group. And it says Wikimedia Commons. And it says in the year 1955. Okay, and as you see here that Rosa Parks, well, her whole name was Rosa Louise Macaulay Parks, February 4th, 1913, was when she was born, and she died October 24th, 2005. They said she was an American activist in the civil rights movement. For her pivotal role in the Montgomery bus boycott, the United States Congress called her the First Lady of Civil Rights and the mother of the freedom movement. Now, we're going to pause it right there for a second because we know that the Indian Civil Rights Act came out in 1968. And one of the things that the Indians were fighting for was to be able to not be discriminated against when it came to housing. And plus what they mentioned in there, according to Phoenix Moon, what she pointed out is that how we know that they were talking about our people was simply because of the riots. They mentioned the riots in the Indian Civil Rights Act. And so we're going to touch on that as well in this video. So, okay. Skipping down, they say her resting place is in Woodland Cemetery, Detroit, Michigan. She died at the age of 92. Her husband was Raymond Parks, and they're saying that's how she signed her documents. It says on December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, Parks rejected the bus driver James F. Blank's order to relinquish her seat in the colored section. And we know that Indians were reclassified because of the Racial Integrity Act in 1924, and that information was given to us because of the research that Dane Calloway had done. So now we know that information. So it says to relinquish her seat in the colored section to a white passenger after the whites only section was filled. Parks was not the first person to resist bus segregation, but the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and we know who the colored people are, the American Indians, believed that she was the best candidate for seeing through a court challenge after her arrest for civil disobedience by violating Alabama segregation laws. Parks' prominence in the community and her willingness to become a controversial figure inspired the black community. And we know the people that were called black were people of African descent, but also people of American Indian descent like us. And it says the boycott the Montgomery buses for over a year, the first major direct action campaign of the post-war civil rights movement. Her case became bogged down in the state courts, but the federal Montgomery bus lawsuit, Browder versus Gale, succeeded in November 1956. Parks' act of defiance and the Montgomery bus boycott became important symbols of the movement. She became an international icon of resistance to racial segregation. She organized and collaborated with civil rights leaders including Edgar Nixon, president of the local chapter of the NAACP, Martin Luther King Jr., and a new minister in Montgomery who gained national prominence in the civil rights movement and went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. At the time, Parks was the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. She had recently attended the Highlander Folk School, a Tennessee center for training activists for workers' rights and racial equality. She acted as a private citizen, tired of giving in. Although widely honored in later years, she also suffered for her act. She was fired from her job as a seamstress in a local department store and received death threats for years afterwards. Shortly after the boycott, she moved to Detroit, where she briefly found similar work. From 1965 to 1988, she served as a secretary and receptionist to John Conyers. Now, pause. Now, John Conyers, as you know, they said that he was a congressman and that he was the longest serving congressman of Congress, and they had disgraced him by bringing him of uh, out of his position at the age of 88, and we know that's a Masonic number, because we know that they like using the number 88, and because it's a 2211, because those are master numbers, and obviously, as always, they always will say African American U.S. representative, but we know, obviously, apparently he was not an African American, that he was an Indian. But anyways, and unfortunately, John Conyers, that he was fighting for reparations, but I'm going to get into that in another video to discuss what John Conyers would, what he did throughout his lifetime, and how he went down the wrong road fighting for reparations under the guise of, for African American people of African descent, when he should have been, enforcing the Constitution and the Indian treaties is what he should have been doing in his lifetime. But anyways, it says she was also active in the Black Power movement in support of political prisoners in the U.S. Now, how do they know that it was the Black Power movement? If anything, everything that she was fighting for is underneath what Phoenix Moon had told us. It's underneath the Indian Civil Rights Act. And our people weren't being called black. They were being called colored or Negro at that time. So we know that that's not true. So anyways, it says after retirement, Parks wrote her autobiography and continued to insist that the struggle for justice was not over and there were more work to be done. In her final years, she suffered from dementia. Parks received national recognition, including the NAACP's 1979 Springard Medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom and Congressional Gold Medal, and a Pomosius statue in the United States Capitol National Statuary Hall. Upon her death in 2005, she was the first woman to lie in honor in the Capitol Rotunda, becoming the third of only 4 Americans to ever receive this honor. It says California and Missouri commemorate Rosa Parks Day on her birthday, February 4th, while Ohio and Oregon commemorate the occasion on the anniversary of the day she was arrested, December 1st. Now, I'm going to concentrate on Detroit right here. And it says here's the famous picture. It says Parks on a Montgomery bus on December 21st, 1956. Okay, and it says after her arrest, Parks became an icon in the civil rights movement, but suffered hardships as a result. Due to economic sanctions used against activists, she lost her job from the department store. And they said later on, she had a job as a hostess at Hampton Institute, a historically black college, and we touched on that earlier, talking about how the black historical colleges, or so-called historically black colleges, were originally Indian schools. Okay, so anyway, it says later that year, urging of her brother and sister-in-law in Detroit, Sylvester and Daisy McCauley, Rosa and Raymond Parks and her mother moved north to join them. The city of Detroit attempted to cultivate a progressive reputation, but Parks encountered numerous signs of discrimination against, it says, African Americans, but we know those were not African Americans, those were Indians. Okay. Let's see here. And then it says here, 1964, Parks told an interviewer, "I don't feel a great deal of difference here." It says housing segregation is just as bad. and it seems more noticeable in the larger cities. She regularly participated in the movement for open and fair housing. Now that's exactly what Phoenix Moon was talking about. She said that they hid it underneath the Housing Act. Okay. Now it says here Parks rendered crucial assistance in the first campaign for Congress by John Conyers. She persuaded Martin Luther King, who was generally reluctant to endorse local candidates, to appear with Conyers. It says thereby boosting the novice candidate's profile. When Conyers was elected, he hired her as a secretary and receptionist for his congressional office in Detroit. And it says in a telephone interview with CNN on October 24, 2005, Conyers recalled, "You treated her with difference because she was so quiet, so serene, just a very special person. There was only one Rosa Parks." Doing much of the daily constituent work for Conyers, Parks often focused on the socio-economic issues, including welfare, education, job discrimination, and affordable housing. She visited schools, hospitals, senior citizen facilities, and other community meetings, and kept Conyers grounded in community concerns and activism. So that's apparently the reason why he kept getting voted in, because he had the help and the blessing of Rosa Parks, which helped him grounded and kept him in the know of what our community needed, so that's why he kept getting voted in. So anyways, it says here, like many Detroit blacks, Parks, and we know Indian, she's an urban Indian, or was an urban Indian, remain particularly concerned about housing issues. It says she herself lived in the neighborhood of Virginia Park, which had been compromised by highway reconstruction and urban renewal. It said by 1962, these policies had destroyed 10,000 structures in Detroit, displacing 43,096 people, 70% of them African American. And we know it's not African American, and we're going to talk about that too, because there was a man, a Caucasian man, who had said to build a fence around the city of Detroit and make it a reservation. And now that man is now dead, which is, or used to be, I think, an executive of one of the counties in Michigan, which was Patterson. Okay, so obviously, as racist as he was, he even knew that Detroit was not filled with people of African descent, but Indians. Okay, so I'm going to drop that video next. But anyways, so let's skip down. I'm going to skip down, keep on skipping down, because I'm going to try to get to, let's see here, her awards that she has. And right here, as you see, that they have her on this gold medal. And as you know, gold, the Congressional Gold Medal, and we know that who are the Indians supposed to be dealing with. Like Aboriginal Mac said, the Indians are supposed to be dealing with the federal government, or the federal government is supposed to be dealing with us, since we are a part of the said government, since we are the Aborigines of this landmass, the Americas. And along with Congress, we have the power to levy taxes and also, make laws and so on and so forth. But that's something that we obviously have to understand and know how to, utilize to our benefit. But anyways, it says Parks and U.S. President Bill Clinton. It says Rosa Parks Transit Center in Detroit. Okay. And then you see it says the number 2857 bus on which Parks was riding before her arrest. It says a GM Old Look transit bus, serial number 1132, is now at the museum exhibit at the Henry Ford Museum. And we discussed Henry Ford because of the fraudulent thing that he did with George Washington Carver, and that George Washington Carver had taught him how to mass produce the car which eventually drove C.R. Patterson's and Sons business out of business. Okay. And then it says in 1976, Detroit renamed 12th Street Rosa Parks Boulevard, which I go past there quite a bit. And if you guys would like to see the rest of this, I will have the link below the video. Now we're going to move on to some other important information, such as the Indian Civil Rights Act. Okay, now this is on a website called study.com, and it says here the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. It says Matt Himmler is an upcoming PhD graduate and archaeologist. He taught anthropology, geography, and art history at the university level. Okay, it says the lesson reviews the passage and consequences of the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. The act guaranteed Native Americans, when we know that should be American Indians, equal protections under the Bill of Rights. However, it created conflict between Native American sovereignty, which should be American Indian sovereignty, and United States rule of law. And the reason why I say American Indian, because it's either the word Aboriginal or Indian nations that is used in the treaties, not Native American. So let's get into it. It says, after suffering many years of genocidal levels of eradication, Native Americans, aka American Indians, had largely been regulated to tribal lands where the United States Constitution did not apply. Tribal lands are plots of land designated by the United States government on which Native Americans, which are American Indians, can live in sovereignty. This situation was far from ideal for Native Americans, which are American Indians, though they chose to live away from a tribal land. They experienced discrimination similar to which African Americans, which we know the African Americans are not of African descent. That's the Paleo Indians, which we know Paleo is, ancient Indians, which are us. And it says if they chose to live on tribal lands, the United States Constitution did not apply to them. It says the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968 granted Native Americans, which is American Indians, for the first time full access to the United States Bill of Rights. This guaranteed them to the right to freedom of religion, the right of habeas corpus or justification of lawful imprisonment, and the right to a trial by jury, among others. The idea behind the extension of the Bill of Rights to Native American communities, which is supposed to be American Indian communities, was that it would protect individuals from potential abuses within tribal lands and pave the way for formal tribal trial courts that would extend the sovereignty of Native American reservations to include legislative authority. This means Native American civil rights will be protected by, as we know, that should be American Indian sovereignty. It says, however, some legal gray areas that resulted from the passage of the act and conflict arose between respecting Native American sovereignty, which should be American Indian, adhering to the principles of the United States Bill of Rights. Then you have here, they said that during the early 20th century, Native Americans from different tribes began pooling resources to create a collective indigenous identity known as the Pan-Indian movement. Now, I think that movement will probably establish after what Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King have done, because, Martin and his wife, Coretta, and Rosa, they all were of American Indian descent. And as we know, different riots have popped up in the 1960s. And in that act, they talk about the riots and they talk about housing discrimination. And as you already know, Rosa Parks she was constantly fighting against housing discrimination. So this is how you know that they're being liars and they're being very disingenuous when they say later on here is when it says by 1960 civil rights issues were brought to the national stage, and it says African American activists. Well, first of all, we know African American was not a term that was used at that time period. It was colored, and the American Indians were reclassified as colored people in 1924 because of the Racial Integrity Act. So we're going to ignore that. And it says, and we're working toward an end to Jim Crow or forced segregation laws in the southern states. Okay. And then it says here, it says civil rights activists were making Native Americans form the American Indian movement in 1968 to tackle civil rights issues plaguing Native American communities. But it was American Indian, obviously. So that's the reason why they call it the Indian Civil Rights Act instead of the Native American Civil Rights Act. Okay? So anyways, so that's what this particular person, what they had to say about this whole thing. All right? So I'm going to leave this there. Okay, and this was what our sister Phoenix Moon was talking about, Civil Rights Act of 1968. It says, landmark law, United States signed into law, King assassination riots. It says, during the King assassination riots by President Lyndon B. Johnson is who signed this, okay? And it was enacted April 11th, 1968. And it says here, it says Indian Civil Rights Act. It's also called the Indian Bill of Rights, the Open Housing Act, Housing Rights Act, Anti-Riot Act, Federal Anti-Riot Act, the Rap-Brown Act, the Rap-Brown Law, the Civil Obedience Act, and the Stokely-Carmichael Act. Okay, and then it says here, we got Title 25, which pertains to Indians. And then it says, which are amendments that was added. Title 18, Crimes and Criminal Procedure. Title 42, Public Health and Welfare. Okay. And then it says here, this is a picture of what happened. And it says Title 10, commonly known as Anti-Riot Act, make it a felony to travel in interstate commerce with the intent to incite, promote, encourage, or participate in and carry on a riot. Now, when you look at that as a clue, who were the people that were rioting at that time period? It was people that was considered as coloreds, and we know that people of American Indian descent were reclassified as colored people. Okay. Then it says here, Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968 is also included underneath that. It says Civil Rights Act of 1866. It says prohibited discrimination in housing. It says there were no federal enforcement provisions. It says 1968 Act expanded on previous acts and prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and since 1974, sex, the sex of a person. And then it says since 1988, the Act protects people with disabilities and families with children. Pregnant women are also protected from illegal discrimination because they have given familial status with their unborn child being the other family member. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to leave this also below so you guys can look at this and click on it for yourselves.
Get off and go to the Blind Pig because the bar is closed, and that became part of your daily activity. So when the rebellion broke out in about 6 o'clock that morning on 12th Street in Claremont, I was right there, Johnny, on the spot. I was living 3 blocks from there on Gladstone. After the police came and tried to raid the Blind Pig and they were surrounded by about 100 workers on the street that started throwing bricks at the police. Then people broke down the street and went to the pawn shops first. Now you got to understand a thing about that almost everybody back then lived off the pawn shop. You work and get paid on Friday, go buy you some stuff, and by Wednesday of the next week, you had to put it in the pawn shop to have enough to eat the next 2 days. And if you ever pawned anything, you know on the back of your pawn slip, it says in great big letters, not responsible for fire, theft, or other unavoidable accidents. So everybody, the first people that went into the pawn shops had to go in there to try to get their own stuff back. Obviously, they took somebody else's when they was in there. I was arrested on the first night for violation of curfew and did 15 days in Ionia State Penitentiary waiting to come back to trial. It's a lot of characteristics of the Detroit Rebellion that was different than other rebellions. First of all, everybody proclaims that the Detroit Rebellion was integrated. The first person killed in the Detroit Rebellion was a white worker that was looting a store down on Trumbull. When they carried me to Ionia, I had 2 white guys on my bus that was arrested for sniping. Secondly, the Detroit Rebellion is the only one that had an assassination that took place during the course of the rebellion, and that's the Algiers incident, the Algiers Motel incident that no longer exists. The first thing they did was rename it to the Desert Inn, and that lasted a few years, and now they closed it. And when you get to Virginia Park and Woodward, it's a gated community with a brick wall there, and the Algiers Motel have been wiped off the pages of history. And when you go to the stoop.
So as you see here in Detroit, Michigan, it's a federal building that's named after Rosa Parks. It is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And the reason why that is symbolic is it's symbolic on several reasons, because we know that American Indians are a matriarchal society and Rosa Parks is a matriarch. So that's why this building is named after her, because the United States government knows that. Then also, they also know that according to Dum Divertus, that it's stated that the American Indians, the Americas, is the homeland of the American Indians, and we will discuss that also within this video. But before we get into that, of what this papal bull, Dum Divertus, talks about, we're going to look at this term here that it uses, rescind. A transitive verb to take away, remove, to take back, cancel. It says to abrogate a contract and restore the parties to the positions they would have occupied had there been no contract. To make void by action of the enacting authority or a superior authority. Repeal. Okay. So basically, what it was saying was, what it seemed like to me, rescind. They were trying to rescind us or take away our authority of us being the superior people of the land of the Americas. Okay, vanquish. Okay, transitive verb to overcome in battle, subdue completely, to defeat in a conflict or contest, to gain mastery over an emotion, passion, or temptation, vanquish. And that's what they said that they were going to do to our people in that document. Okay, so then you have also subdue. And it says transitive verb, conquer and bring into subjugation, vanquish, to bring under control, especially by an exertion of the will, curve, to bring land under cultivation, to reduce the intensity or degree of tone down. Okay, so doctrine of discovery. It says doctrine of discovery established a spiritual, political, legal justification for colonization and seizure of land not inhabited by Christians. And our ancestors weren't Christians. They considered them as like pagans. It says it had been invoked since Pope Alexander, I think that means the 4th, issued the papal bull of Inter Cartera in 1493. The papal decree aimed to justify Christian European explorers' claims on lands and waterways they allegedly discovered and promote Christian domination and superiority that had been applied in Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Americas. It says FN explorer proclaims to have discovered the land in the name of the Christian European monarchs, plants a flag in its soil, and reports his discovery to the European rulers and returns to occupy it. The land is now his, even if someone else was there first. It says, should the original occupants insist on claiming that the land is theirs, the discoverer can label the occupants' way of being on the land inadequate according to European standards. This ideology supported the dehumanization of those living on the land and their dispossession, murder, and forced assimilation. The doctrine fueled full white supremacy insofar as white European settlers claimed that they were instruments of a divine design and possessed cultural superiority. Okay, so now I'm going to skip down. And it says, in 1823 Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh, the doctrine of discovery became part of the U.S. federal law and was used to dispossess native peoples of their land. In an unanimous decision, Chief Justice John Marshall writes that the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to New World lands and native peoples certain rights of occupancy. And I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so it says here, it says, Camus said the Loretto letter was sent to the Vatican and to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. She said the Loretto community received no response from the Vatican. U.S. Bishops Conference President Archbishop Joseph Kurtz sent a note with a polite thank you for including me. She said the sisters have contacted Kurtz, who heads the Louisville, Kentucky Archdiocese, and he's expressed interest in getting more information, she said, and we're preparing that for him. Other groups have called on the Pope to address the doctrine of discovery. In 2014, leadership of Conference of Women Religious asked the Pope to rescind the doctrine. In June 2015, Romero Institute, a nonprofit law and public policy center focusing on the Native American issues, named after slain Salvadorian Archbishop Oscar Romero, did the same from the Native perspective. The Indigenous Law Project's Newcomb, who is Shawnee and Lenape, discussed the issue directly with Vatican officials. On May 16, 2007, Newcomb and other Native American representatives presented their case to Archbishop Celestino Migliore, now Apostolic Nuncio to Poland and then permanent observer to the Holy See to the United Nations in New York City. On July 16th, they received a letter from Migliore informing them that subsequent papal bulls have abrogated the ones that they wanted revoked, including a bull from 1537 that explicitly forbade enslaving Indians and all other people who may later be discovered by Christians. As for the doctrine's more recent interlacing with U.S. law, the refutation of this doctrine is therefore now under the competence of American politicians, legislators, lawyers, and legal historians, Migliore wrote. So to me, it seems like as though what he's saying is that how we can get this rescinded or get this removed from U.S. law, it's going to take American Indian, tribal nations to do that, and have them to repeal these laws. And I feel like, obviously, federally recognized tribes, they're looked at as as being domestic, dependent nations. But when you go to the international level, using the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, according to that, there is such a thing called the Indigenous Trust, and I believe fauna, they can help you create your tribal trust, which goes along the lines of using your bloodline. In other words, you have to use your genealogy to prove what Indian tribe you are a descendant of, and that you have to write your constitution and write down your pre-colonial American Indian family history, and like what happened to your family because of your family being colonized by the European powers, or as they call it, Christian nations. So anyways, I will leave the link below for that. So if you guys are interested in creating your tribe and to get help on doing so, then I will have the link to Fauna's website on YouTube below as well. And I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I guess it's time to get to work. Okay, now this is an opinion piece underneath The Guardian written by Timothy Snyder, and it says the U.S. government should cede territory back to the Native Americans. Historically, immigrants were given special rights to take native land. If Trump says we are no longer a nation of immigrants, that has consequences. Does the federal government mean to cede the land of the United States back to the Native Americans, which we know is American Indians? Then it says the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, has altered its mission statement, removing the characterization of America as a nation of immigrants in order to emphasize the new goal of securing the homeland. Some critics made the point that most citizens are immigrants or their descendants, while others noted that most Americans believe that immigration should remain stable or increase. And then it says, since our country exists, we don't ask ourselves how and why. The legal foundation of the federal claim to dominion over territory is something called the Doctrine of Discovery, a notion that goes back 5 centuries. And it says here, Portugal, Spain, France, England claimed territory by planting a flag, a symbolic action known as discovery. Now, it says here, it says the young American Republic preserved the European doctrine. And it says Chief Justice John Marshall took for granted the obvious fact that America was the homeland of the Native Americans, which we know is really American Indians, the rightful occupants of the soil. By the logic of discovery, Native Americans, aka American Indians, had no rights because America was their homeland. Their power to dispose of the soil at their own will to whomsoever they pleased was denied by the original fundamental principle that discovery gave exclusive title to those who made it. So to me, it seemed like what they were saying was that this particular title that the Christian powers claim that they have through the Doctrine of Discovery, which we know was a papal bull that was issued by the Catholic Church to basically subdue and to vanquish anybody that was not a Christian. And then it says in American law, to have a homeland established, no sovereignty over territory, only immigration created such authority, according to Marshall English charters and claims, had established an absolute and complete title to the land of North America, and then passed to the United States in 1776. Okay, so basically, what it's saying is that we had never really challenged that title and basically told them that no, you don't have the right, to our homeland, and that us as Aboriginal people, indigenous people, that we have the right to our own land and natural resources.